Sarah Isham from Career Education right here, just like the jacket says. I'm one of the college career mentors. We are so excited tonight to have two really special guests. Helen Wang, the Director of Residential Life and Housing, right here. Let's welcome Helen. And Claudia Trevor-Wright, Assistant Director of Health Education. And they are going to be talking about the practices of wellness and community building right here, right now, on April 4th. I do have the correct date. So before we tell you more, and they tell you more, both Helen and Claudia, about their bios, I would love to get a sense of who we have here. So how many first-year students do we have? Sophomores? Juniors? Okay. Seniors? Okay, and other wonderful special...
Don't cry, it's okay.
Yes, from Career Education, who I'm sure will introduce themselves. So, several things I want to tell you. This discussion is going to be lively. It's already started off that way. So this is going to be, right, the ways in which Claudia and Helen coach and encourage others to build communities of care, develop health and wellness practices. So they're going to touch on a lot of very important topics. Managing stress. Definitely want to hear more about this. Finding your community during times of transition. Wellness as a daily practice, and more. So you've got to stay tuned for the more part, right? Okay, so following this conversation, as I'm sure you all may know, there is going to be a networking session over here, and you will have an opportunity to connect with some faces that you may know. So Wellesley alumni, you may have noticed some of the names, and fellow students. So we're really glad that you're here. I will not do these bios justice of Helen and Claudia, but I'm going to try. So fill in if there's something that I miss. But let's start with Claudia. So again, Claudia Trevor-Wright, right here, received her BA in Psychology and MA in Health Education from New York University, and her JD from Boston University School of Law. She has worked at New York University Center for Health Promotion, and is it SICUS? Oh, good. Thank you. The Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. So Claudia was a Dean Scholar at Boston University School of Law and a Rappaport Fellow, am I pronouncing this correctly? Okay, good. In Law and Public Policy, focusing on teen pregnancy prevention in Massachusetts. As an attorney, Claudia served corporate and nonprofit clients and helped survivors of domestic violence to obtain protective orders. Claudia is passionate about women's health and social justice. She enjoys getting her hands dirty in the garden and experimenting with baking, maybe bacon too. Okay, let me know on that one. In the health service kitchen. She lives in Natick with her husband, 2 sons, and 2 cats. So let's give Claudia a warm round of applause. We're doing the same for you, Helen. Don't worry. Helen Wang has 13 years of progressive leadership experience in residence life, where she has implemented a residential curriculum and researched, designed, and delivered a new philosophy for residential education. Helen Wang is a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, where she has served as an English instructor, and the College of William and Mary, where she spent a year as the Director of Cross-Cultural Collaboration with, you'll have to help me here, is it? Keio, thank you. University in Japan. She has also served as a visiting faculty member at the University of Hong Kong. So Helen lives right here, as some of you may know, in Freeman Hall with her family and English Bulldog Millie. So let's give Helen Wang a round of applause. I'm sure I have probably left out many great things about both of you, but we are so excited to learn from you and share, and happy that all of you could join us. And Career Education, friends, anything you'd like to say before we get started?
just like to thank those of you that have been to the prior events that we've had part of this series, and I hope you walk away with just as much knowledge as you have with us. I'm sure you will. Thanks.
And I am stepping to the side.
All right.
Right?
Shall we begin?
Yes.
Yes, please, that would be great. Thank you.
All right.
All right, Claudia, so tell me what made you say yes to the event.
So what made me say yes to this event? Can everyone hear us in the back?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. So I will say I make it a practice to say yes to as many opportunities to interact with students as possible. So that's not a hard sell. But I will also say this was the kind of programming I would have loved to have as an undergraduate. I think almost everything I do in my work is something that I would have really benefited from having as an undergraduate. So I'm really happy to be here, especially because I get to hang out with you, Helen, but to talk about what it means to build community wherever you are, because that's something that I've had to work at in my time. And anytime I get to talk about health and well-being, I do it. So it was easy. Yeah. And what made you say yes to being here tonight?
Well, it's obviously very hard to say no to the wonderful people in career ed, and the opportunity to interact with your friend Claudia is always a treat, especially at the end of a really long day, to be able to talk about something that's deeply personal and inextricable with who I am as a person and as a professional. It just feels like, I was just telling Claudia, we're in a really stressful time in our office, and it feels good to sit here and talk about wellness and well-being with all of you. So it's a pleasure.
So, Helen, here we sit surrounded by this culture that oftentimes celebrates a narrative of being busy and being stressed and being productive. So when we operate in that space, how do you carve out time for the practices that make you feel good and that facilitate your well-being?
So I've been, well, I guess there's a little bit of context here. So I've been teaching and practicing yoga for the last 22 years of my life, and I teach it here on Mondays. I hope you'll join me at some point. And it's a really great opportunity for me to give back to my community. I think about life as, let me back up. In China, there is a 50-lane highway. If you can imagine a 50-lane highway, right? And that 50-lane highway merges into, guess how many lanes? 4 lanes. And that 4 lanes, if you can imagine, could potentially merge into 1 lane. Right? And at the end of that single lane, maybe there's a dirt road. And at the end of that dirt road, I like to imagine it's just me. Right? So I think about the busyness of the world as like a 50-lane highway that we're constantly traveling on. But the miracle of it is that we can bring it down to a 4-lane road, to a 1-lane road, to a dirt road, to clearly see who we are as a person. So busyness to me is, in that image, is how we function on an everyday level. So it's almost not an option to not tend to yourself when you're busy, right? And so that's why when I think about finding times for mindfulness-based stress reduction practices, which I really appreciate in my life, or yoga, or being with my dog, I think about the necessity to clear those lanes from my mind so I can see what's clearly in front of me. So it's in not just a moment or a practice, but in everything that you do, how you arrive with a friend, when you're sitting and talking and just being present. I think that is the true core of mindfulness, that it's embodied, and it can be punctuated by moments or practices or habits that we have used to signify the importance of that. But really, by and large, it's just how we sit in every moment with another human being, like fully ourselves, without the 50 lanes behind us, right? So I don't know if that helps, but I've been thinking about that metaphor a lot, and how that is such an accurate representation of the frenetic nature of life. And it doesn't necessarily need to be that way, even though it may feel that way. What about you, Claudia?
I need to see that 50-lane highway.
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Okay. See, I learned, this is what I love about being at Wellesley. I learned something new all day long, not just every day,
Yeah.
all day long.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you protect well-being.
So I will admit that I have an internal resistance to the idea of making well-being another thing that I have to do, or that sort of occupies space. And I have thought about it in different ways at different points in my life. And as you heard from my bio, I've had careers in health education and in law, and my ability to care for myself differs pretty substantially between those two spaces. And I just, I believe in being honest. My ability to take care of myself when I was practicing law is really different than my ability to take care of myself in a really thoughtful way than when I'm working as a health educator. And there's a reason why I'm a health educator and not a lawyer anymore, because that wasn't a good fit for me. But I also, I'm still busy, and busy is okay. But I tend to think about my well-being practice as something that needs to be not just 2 hours here, out of a day, or a day every week to do this. It's as I'm reading emails, how am I thinking about myself, right? If I'm in a difficult conversation or experiencing some discomfort, am I turning on myself, right? So it's about how I have learned to think in addition to what I do. And I think the thinking piece has actually been more impactful to my well-being. If you speak to anyone in counseling, they'll tell you your thoughts, drive your feelings. So for me, it has to start with how I think about myself and how I experience myself. And I've really benefited from the work I do in self-compassion and gratitude, and reframing negative thoughts, and not engaging in negative self-talk, which culturally for me
So hard.
is quite I come from a family and a culture where negative self-talk has certain benefits and certain social capital, and I've learned to deprogram that, but it's active work. So yes, I do need to move my body, and I need to sleep. And if anyone went to the sleep panel, I sleep. That's non-negotiable, even when I was a lawyer. The only time I have ever pulled an all-nighter is when I gave birth, once, and I gave birth twice. So I can't do it, right? So for me, that's non-negotiable. The other stuff, there's a lot of balancing that goes on every day.
I want to pick up on a thread. If anyone has ever had the awesome opportunity to sit with Claudia, you ever sit with somebody and you're like, they see my soul, they're like looking into my eyes and they're present, like this woman does that. And when I think about you talking about how it's about gratitude and just finding out where we are and how our thinking is, well-being and taking care of yourself is, I learned this from you, is the ability to arrive at the person so that your stuff can sit in the back a little bit and you can be there for them. I think that's really, I think that's practice as I can also develop, but I definitely think that I found that in our conversations. Okay.
Want to talk about community?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we think about how, for some of us, school, whether it's elementary school, middle school, college, has provided us with a pool in which we derive our community, and you sort of have that to choose from, and that changes when you're not in school anymore. And what advice do you have for the seniors who may be cringing at the thought of how to build community once that container changes?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. And seniors are so much on my mind right now because of transition out of college. It's as difficult, if not more difficult, than transition into college, right? Because we leave this place and we emerge into these new contexts with so many different challenges and without our toolkit. The thing I want to say to seniors is just keep going. You don't arrive at your new context without so many skill sets and so much practice under your belt. So you're doing everything right when you go out into the world. And that discomfort, I think that discomfort is is yourself making space for something new, right? We get uncomfortable because we're ready and we're preparing ourselves both in our body and our minds to let something go to make room for something new. So I think that building community in a new context is about sitting with the discomfort to imagine what new type of context, people, experiences am I going to make room for? But that means I got to let go of some of the things that I've used in the past that worked for me here. And it's kind of a learning process of it, like that way of navigating the world it's going to look a little different. So my advice is just trust yourself, like, just keep going. You're doing something really right, and if you doubt yourself, the past predictor, what is it, that past behavior is oftentimes a good predictor of future behavior or something like that. And so the successes and the many successes that everyone has had in negotiating in complex spaces here in relationships, like you've learned all of that. I also think that don't be lonely alone. And I think that here too, I think it's really easy to feel like we are the only one who is lonely, right? So, and that takes courage to say, I feel lonely today, but I won't be alone. I'm going to go to spaces and community where there's a publicness to it, because our default is to self-isolate when we're in transition, right? Because we don't know if the kind of wonkiness that we are right now is going to be received, right? And especially in a new context, when you're trying to navigate that can feel really difficult. So keep going and don't be lonely alone, because everyone's lonely. Everyone is lonely at some point. Just don't do it alone. Now I want to hear your thoughts on this.
I love that saying. Don't be lonely alone. So I think about building community and making friends as a very intentionally developed skill. And I'm really good at it, so I'm just going to own it. That I will make a friend wherever I am. Like, I need a friend wherever I am. So I find a friend wherever I am. And I've yet to really be rebuffed in a way that I remember, but I always remember the friends that I've picked up in different places. So some of you know I really like data, and I'm into data, and one of my favorite sources of data right now is Gallup. They do a lot of really interesting data collection about well-being, and one of the best indicators of your career success, and this will tie into our hosts, is do you have a best friend at work? That's my favorite data point. If you have a best friend at work, you are going to be such a more, like, not just productive, but like fulfilled and engaged employee. So it's in employers' best interest that people cultivate friendships at work. And I wouldn't say that that's the data that drove my decision, but I have always had a person, or many people. I now collect people. Some of them are in this room, right? But I need to have my people. I spend most of my waking day here. I want to be connected with people who make me feel good, and who I enjoy their company and I learn from. And so I collect people wherever I go. And that includes, even if I'm there for a really brief period of time. So I'm challenging myself to go to things alone, because it's not always been my way of doing things, but I'm challenging myself to go to things alone. And so I've recently gone to some political activities alone, because I can't always find someone who wants to do that thing with me. And one of the last times I did that, it felt really vulnerable to be alone in that space. And I just happened to see this person who was sitting by herself.
Yeah.
And I was pretty sure I had seen her before, but I wasn't positive. And I just looked at her and I was like, hi, I feel like I've seen you before. Are you here for the same thing I'm here for? And like, she was in such a difficult place, and we just like made this really deep connection. And we were there for each other that day, and we still keep in touch.
So amazing.
And it's because I sort of got over myself and I was like, I see you, you see me.
Yeah.
Let's just like be each other's person today.
Is that how you do this? When
I
you
do.
You just like get over yourself. You're
I just get over it.
person.
I'm just like, okay, like, and if you reject me, fine, okay,
Yeah.
I'll live. I probably won't remember it in a day because I don't,
Yeah.
I probably won't. That's
Yeah.
what middle age is about. I'm gonna forget it in a day. But if we connect, I'm gonna remember it forever.
So for you, it's worth the risk.
So I take that risk
Yeah.
regularly because I need someone to be my person in that space at that time.
I love that. I'm gonna observe that and practice that. Get over myself. Okay, So, why don't you talk a little bit about this? I'm just interested in, yeah, let's build on this a little bit more because I would totally sit on a session about making friends because quite honestly, I am a very strong introvert. And so I have this like feeling in my throat and my gut and I'm like, oh my God, they're gonna like me. Especially here as a new person, I'm like, people are gonna like me all the time. And I have to get over myself and make the friends. So I think that, you know, making friends in a community is extremely hard. So tell us more about how you do that. You get over yourself and you just go for it. What do you have to sort of quiet down in yourself and what do you have to build up to have that?
Well, I'll admit to being a big old extrovert, so it's not actually that hard for me. But I do have. But afterwards, I do need to introvert a little bit and go. I do need my alone time too. I think it's practice and having been rewarded positively. How many? Do we have psych majors here? Who's taken animal behavior? Right. My conduct hasn't been extinguished yet because I've been rewarded more than I've been punished. And I've done it enough now that I've been rewarded with these really deep, meaningful connections with people, even if they don't last. And that's the thing, you know, so in college you have 4 years together, right? But then people graduate every year, right? So sometimes you're together for a while and sometimes you're together for the rest of your life. But even if you're together for just a little while, I've been rewarded with these incredibly meaningful, deep connections. So I haven't been extinguished. My behavior hasn't been extinguished. So yes, I had to get over that, like, oh, they might not want to talk to me. But again, now, you know, having done this for several, you know, many years now, I can't remember the times I've been rejected.
Yeah.
But I can remember the times where I've been successful and rewarded. So. And how about you? What advice do you have about how you get past that barrier of building community?
Yeah. You know, so Wells is a new community for me, and it's been a really active community. So I think you just have to make the time and emotional space to open up to people, right? And I think building community is really hard because it's about defining for yourself your scope too. So as a person, as a busy student, how much time and energy do you have for the scope of the people that you want to hold close to you? So that's always been a thing for me because I try not to do things out of obligation as much as I can, like in my life, right? And especially friendships. I never want to have friendships where it's as if, you know, somebody owes somebody something. I want it to be really real and genuine. And so I think that, you know, it's really important for me to have the right scope of friendships, right? For me as an introvert, I can't have a ton of friends. I want to, but I can't because I want to really deeply have those friendships and show up for people in the moments that they need me to show up for them, and to really like love up on my friends. So as I'm trying to like tether my connections from my 13 years in Pittsburgh and all my friends there and make new friends here, it's been like a real, you know, interesting process of figuring out, you know, if I'm going to be real with people, I'm going to really keep these friendships, what does that look like? And I imagine for some of our seniors in the room that you're thinking about it. One of the things I've really observed about Wellesley, and I see this now in the selection, right? Deep, meaningful connections and intimate relationships with one another that's built in this really unique place. And that happens, but it's not the case for everybody, right? So I guess I also want to say that if you don't have that now, it doesn't mean you'll never have that, or it's not coming, you know, it's not around the corner. So have faith if your experience is not exactly like it is with your peers here. Sometimes it takes people a good long time to marinate. And sometimes, you know, friendships really come from when you're at a different age too, I have to be honest. You know, people kind of get over their stuff a little bit easier too. So I just want to put a nod of faith out there.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that, because that reminds me to stop thinking like a 40-something-year-old woman and to think like my college self for a moment and put out there that I was not successful in doing that as an undergraduate. So I went away to college for 2 years, and then I ended up transferring and moving back home to complete 2 years somewhere else. And part of the reason that I felt so unhappy where I was for my first 2 years is because I didn't get to, I wasn't in a place to cultivate those deep relationships. And then I lived at home with my parents for 2 years. And I had friends, but I didn't have the same kind of college experience where it's like, I spent 4 years with this same crew, we lived together, like that wasn't my college experience. I didn't actually have that until I was a graduate student.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes I've worked with students here who are coming to the end of their time like, I never had this narrative be my narrative. And I'm like, that's okay, you may not get that until a little bit later, you'll get it. It's, it may not be here, and that's okay. It wasn't my experience as an undergrad.
So how do you build well-being practices so you aren't always trying to catch up on self-care? That's a good question, so catching up on self-care.
I try not to make the practices be bigger or more laborious than they need to be.
Yeah.
So a health educator in our discipline, we look at any positive behavior change as a win. Any incremental movement in a positive direction is something we celebrate. Like, you don't have to get to, 100%. If you move up 1%, we're going to celebrate that, and it's awesome. So I would say, again, it's sort of being mindful to the little things in a day, and not putting the pressure on myself to get it done every day perfectly, right? Like, there's going to be days when I eat like crap. It's okay. It's okay. I pay attention to the course of a week and how am I doing in the course of a week. There were times in my life where I didn't sleep very well, and it was out of my control because I had a baby with chronic ear infections. I knew it would end. I did my best, but I don't put pressure on myself to perform self-care perfectly all the time. I do the best that I can as I'm able, but I also would say that I'm better able at it when I approach my self-care from a philosophy of valuing myself. And seeing that as not just about me. So when I do self-care workshops, oftentimes I refer to my theoretical frame comes from Audre Lorde. And the concept that I'm embedded in a system that may not value me. And I have to value myself. And I cannot expect anyone else to put my needs before their own. I have to be able to say, like, I deserve sleep. I deserve to be treated well, and humanely. I deserve that, and the reason why it's important for me to value myself is because then I'm modeling for other people who are like me that it's okay for you to value yourself in that way as well. If I devalue myself, I'm sort of like making it tacitly okay for others to devalue themselves when I believe all of us are worthy of being humanely treated and having our basic needs be met. So part of it is about doing it for myself, and part of it is about modeling for people that it's okay. And for you?
So I have a 4-year-old who keeps me on my toes, and a challenging position keeps me on my toes. So for me, I consider this year a year of transition, so I've actually gone pretty heavy on the things that I need to erase the grit of the world, right? That's how I see it. That's sort of my current working definition of self-care. So I go to yoga, really intense yoga classes twice a week. Once in a while, I punctuate my life with these sort of like 1 week where I just need to really pay attention to this thing, whether it's like getting rid of some like internet technology or getting rid of a food thing for me. That's just what I do to remind myself that it's possible to transform when I really am disciplined about it. So for me, self-care is a kind of discipline. I've been thinking about how, like, when we talk about self-care, at least the way that I'm conceiving of it, it's not like we do it because it's decadent. It's like we have to have care of ourselves because we're erasing all the chaos of the world. It's like getting rid of the grit, right? And that's just baseline. That's just maintenance. You just need to do that to function in a world that comes at you with all of this external chaos and stimuli. But there's something a little bit like beyond that. So I do all this stuff, right? So I can get to my baseline. just to get at 0, right? Just to get at like I'm operating at the core, clear sense of who I am. But then I also go to, well then what? What's next? And so I think that self-realization or actualization is the moment when you realize that the world is full of beauty, and it's our like joy as human beings to bask in that, to own that, to receive that beauty, to sort of figure out how we can express our full self when we have done the self-care, right? So I think self-care is really important, and I want to see us all do something for ourselves that's not about getting ourselves back to 0, right? Back to not tattered by the world, but to like fully engage and live. Does that make sense?
It does.
Just this thought, yeah. Okay.
I really like this question,
Yeah.
so I'm going to go first.
Go for it.
to ask you. So self-care is, I think,
Yeah.
has been somewhat co-opted
Yeah.
to be marketed
Yep.
as a consumer practice and a consumerism behavior, and that it can be really packaged as, what you buy for yourself or what service you can provide for yourself, and as a luxury, like you said. And, it doesn't sound like that's what that is for you. How do you sort of extract it from that consumerist packaging?
Yeah. Anything, like you have to know why you're doing something, right? And I'm a very lazy exerciser. I am not going to be able to self-care for myself. I'm not going to be able to exercise every single day. So I think about what is it that I'm not going to do so that I can do this thing, right? I think that we need very little to take care of ourselves when we tell ourselves that you don't actually have to. It's the opposite of this term. Don't just sit there, do something. It's like don't just do something, sit there. Like what happens when we just sit there for just a little tiny bit? And we just allow ourselves to be at rest. That I think is the very first step of self-care. I also think it is our responsibility, those of us who are in this practice, to give what we have away, whatever we have, we just give it away. And so that's why I always talk about this yoga class idea, because it's a silly thing and it's small, but I want people to have access to these practices so that you don't need to go to the yoga class, you can do it on your own because it feels good, right? And so when we're in college, finding the ways to engage in these practices for free, I think is really critical, because you don't need to go to a studio, right? You can be in your own practice, sitting on a mat, or just sitting wherever you are and feeling good and whole and quiet, right? And if meditation is the practice of creating a home for your mind, right, we can all get closer to that without spending a lot.
So a resource that I often refer students to, and that I use myself, and I will share with anyone who will listen, is the Greater Good Center at UC Berkeley. So they are an entire center devoted to understanding the practices of well-being and developing scientific bases for all of these practices. And none of them cost anything. And they do a wonderful job of translating it to a user-friendly package, so that you can say, this is something I can incorporate into my everyday. So one of the disciplines that they encourage you to practice that is demonstrated as effective for your well-being is awe. To look around you and experience awe. So that doesn't actually take that long, especially on this campus. And I did it today on my way to work. I parked and I walked from the parking lot to the health service, and in that swampy area where the reeds are just starting to come back, I heard the most beautiful bird song. And I was like, I need to see this bird. So I just stopped for a second, and it was hard to see because they're camouflaged, which is why they're there, because that's helpful for them. And I was like, and I located the bird, and I just stared at the bird for a minute, and I listened to its song, and I was like, that felt great. And that didn't cost me anything. And it took me all of 5 seconds. But it is a much different way to walk into my somewhat busy and stressful day, having taken a moment to look around, appreciate the world, listen to a bird song, and just be like, that bird was awesome, and totally free. And I try to do that around here on a regular basis. because this campus is gorgeous and full of moments of awe if you would just linger outside and look and listen and be and smell, and it's all just, yeah. So the Greater Good Center has all of these wonderful things that you can incorporate that take very little time and are evidence-based.
Also, I have one more as you're dropping my thinking about the UCLA Mindfulness Center. They have these free meditations that you can just download, which was the start of a meditation practice for me. There's a lot out there in the world of positive psychology and that they're really looking to give people access to these tools. So I think transitioning out and already, like if you're a senior, or actually anytime, like just to develop the habits of that so it feels really natural to have something to go to can be really, really great.
So you were talking about how you've moved from a space where you had a really strong and tight community for a long period of time, and how you've been uprooted and come here where you have to sort of start that again. And having done that, it's a very similar experience to I think what our seniors are going, looking forward to. How do you sort of nurture yourself through that transition period while you're building your new nest?
Thank you, Brett. I think it's a question I would love to ask everybody, right? Because everyone's in some moment of transition at some point. For me, I tend to use writing as my format to communicate when I have things that feel reflective, and I do a lot of internal processing, then I put it into words. For me, that tends to be the clearest way for me to express myself to my community, to myself, and it seems to rinse out those moments that you wish you had more of, where you could say the things that are in your heart, but you just don't have, right? And you can't capture it, or there isn't a space to do that. People need to express themselves. So that's what I do. I think it's really important for everybody, mindfulness who's in this room, to think about how do you fully connect to your clearest, most audacious and bold self, and then put all of your resources, or a chunk of your resources there, so that you can really hone that skill set. It's been really cathartic for me. I tend to, when I need that, I'll just take a day and reflect and write and sit and think and just do a whole lot of nothing and just sit. Yeah. How about you?
So even though I haven't changed my environment very much in the last 8 years, the environment around me has changed, and the people who are part of it have changed. And a quarter of you graduate every year, and every year I'm telling someone, like, I can't believe you're leaving me. Why are you leaving me? And I get sad about you leaving me, even though I'm happy for you. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that our environments are always changing. They are always dynamic. And I think that's why, for me, it's important to make sure that I have a diversity of people and connections to sustain me. I need that to be fully happy and present and healthy in my life. Knowing that there are going to be times when people are a little bit more distant, and that's okay. And sometimes I need to be more of my own best friend. And then I think I try to follow the advice that I give others who are looking to build community, which is, okay, well, what makes you feel good about yourself, right? Or is there something that you can do to put out into the world? So let's say, I've had friends who have gone through periods of unemployment, or who have retired, and they're sort of bereft of community all of a sudden. And I'll say, well, why don't you go volunteer, right? Or go to other spaces where you get to do something and engage a part of you that makes you feel good about yourself, and watch what will happen. You'll connect to other people, and other people who share your values or are interested in the same things that you are going to be there and watch what happens. And so when the community changes and when I lose, sort of the closeness of somebody, I might sort of push into other spaces and try to recreate that dynamic.
Okay, so you touched on this a little bit, Claudia, about doing things alone, restaurants, movies. Any tips on how to navigate that? Like, what did you do when you started to kind of
So I'll admit that there are some things I can do alone, and there are some things that I just don't ever think I'm going to feel great at doing alone, and that I just probably wouldn't do alone. And I think I'm okay with that. Like, life will go on. But there are times when I'm traveling for work, and I have to eat dinner, and again, I think some people need to introvert, and you should introvert. I respect that. If you want to eat dinner alone in bed, you should eat dinner alone in bed. It actually sounds delightful right now. But I think other times, again, if you can just sort of locate one piece. So for a lot of people, the joy in a meal is connection with others. And for some people, the joy of a meal is the meal. And so if you could just be there, like, and focus on the meal, and just like enjoy that experience and be in your senses, as opposed to like looking around and wondering if people are staring at you because you're by yourself. So I was in Washington, D.C. for a work trip recently, and I love ramen. And there was a ramen place around the corner that I really wanted to go to, and no one was available for dinner. And I was like, I'm going to go eat ramen by myself. And that was uncomfortable for me. But I just went and I ate ramen, and I was living my best life. And I was like, and I didn't really care if anyone was looking at me like, why are you eating ramen alone? Because I was just super focused. I was watching them cook. And I was, I just attended to different things. I could choose to dwell on the fact that I would have preferred to be with somebody, or I could choose to dwell in the thoughts of like being present in the environment and looking at the people preparing my food and being grateful for the people preparing my food, and looking at the craft of somebody doing something, and then just sitting and enjoying the sensory experience of eating delicious ramen. I highly recommend this. But it's not just like a kind of fun story. Mindful eating is a thing. It's an evidence-based practice. If you can enjoy the sensory experience of a meal, it's a much different experience. So I would say try to just be attentive to different thoughts and be attentive to different senses, and pay less attention to the voice that's like nagging you about you doing something alone. Because that voice will still be there, but it's not feeding you in any way.
It's really good, guys. Now I really want ramen.
Ramen is delicious.
So when I was in Hong Kong, as I was teaching in Hong Kong, I was by myself, and my partner was in New York. We were doing distance, and so I was just like navigating a new landscape by myself. And so I have a pro tip on this: just go and find your places. This is for eating, right? So I found this. I lived in a part of Hong Kong where it was very local, so I found a place that was like the place I went to every evening for dinner. And I don't speak Cantonese; I speak something else, right? And after a while, I just go up there, I'm like, give me something, just give me whatever you think I like. And then it just became a part of my routine, and that space was my community, right? It was my habit. It was really nice to find my coffee place, my noodle place, and so having places where people expect you on a regular, I think it's really nice. It's like find your L table or whatever it is for you here, or your hoop. That feels like you can build a community around that. I do like doing some of the stuff on my own. I have to say I do like that. When I feel conspicuous, I bring a book.
Yes.
Bring a book and pretend like, I'm doing that. But I do think that the practice of being able to do things by yourself is one you probably have to navigate at some point. But it does make it feel more like home when you're moving to a new place and you find your locations. And they get to know you, they get to expect you, and then you bring something special and unique to that community as well. So. Ooh.
This is a good one.
Yeah.
So the last question that we have is about how you navigate boundaries at work. So we talked a lot about how important it is to have a work bestie, or to have your people around you at work. But you also need to have professional boundaries. And there is a difference between your personal friendships and your work friendships to a point. So how do you navigate those boundaries in the workplace?
Boundaries, for every time I hear the word boundaries, I resist it, which must mean I have some work to do there, because I'm like, everything is porous, right? I'm like,
wow, we need to talk.
Yeah. I'm like, everyone come into my bosom. That's like, like, what's the matter with me? But I do think that boundaries is really important, because work is I mean, the work that we do on a college campus, I have to say, is personal, because we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't deeply care and love our students. So it wasn't about like wanting to give whatever we have to our students. Like, that's how I feel. So I think the work is personal, which makes this kind of space a little bit different and cloudier maybe than another space. But I do think, I can just talk about my partner. I watch the way he finds clarity, and he's actually better when he has boundaries at his work, right? It's less integrated, you know, it doesn't feel like everything that I am as a person is defined by my work, which actually I can learn a lot from. I think that's a really important skill set to have. So I think the boundary setting for him in terms of a mindset has allowed him to be clear and more focused, so that when he's at work, he's at work. When he is dad, he's dad, you know? And I think there's something to be learned from that. I don't know, tell me all your secrets.
I'm not saying I'm great at this. So I would say I err on the side of connection. But at the same time, so in my line of work, we always say boundaries are loving. And that boundaries are a way that we sort of love ourselves and love other people. So that's why I'm like, we have to talk. Right, but boundaries can serve a purpose, right? And all things in moderation. So I think it may be different. So we have, our generation has the experience of being in a professional environment pre-social media.
Right.
And I think that changes everything. And I think it can get really blurry in terms of what you bring to the presence you bring to the workplace versus your social media presence, and like deciding when you will sort of breach that wall. So for me, there are parts of me that are not for work. And they're for people outside of here, and that's as it should be, because and it doesn't mean that people who I work with don't eventually enter that space, but it's not my default assumption. So my default assumption is like there are parts of my life that are just for outside of work, and the people who are part of my life outside of work, and I sort of choose carefully what parts I bring into work, and I think I've learned all of these things by making mistakes, but I will say that it's always harder to pull back than it is to push forward. So I tend to err on the side of being a little bit conservative about what I bring into work, because I know you can't unring certain bells. So if I develop a friendship with somebody that goes beyond work, and I often do, I try to sort of keep that part of our friendship outside of work too. But that said, I think there are deep and abiding friendships that I develop at work, and there are spaces that are fluid and free-flowing. I'm going to share my love of food with people. I'm going to bake for you. I'm going to bring stuff in, and I'm going to eat whatever you bring in, if I can eat it. And but there are other things that are just for outside, and that's okay. And that was the last of our questions for each other.
So we're going to open this up now to all of you for questions that you have for Claudia and Helen.
And so, you don't have any. No pressure.
Not everyone else.
I heard something.
So we're all upperclassmen. I go into the students come in, and I've heard a lot about translating sort of a career or academic interests into sort of a career. I've also thought about this myself and talked to people I trust a lot. And some of the advice I've gotten is sort of look at what the job is that you're doing rather than what it is the space or environment is that you're doing, because an entry-level position is not I won't use glamorous because I don't think work is rarely glamorous, but the more high-profile, like cerebral, innovative, creative side. We're more of the grind. So I was wondering how you all, or just in your experience, have sort of filtered through all of the possibilities of a post-grad job into, okay, here's something that I could really make my own in that, grind, get it done, kind of wheel understanding.
I feel like we have some interesting trajectories to share about how we got to where we got. So after my undergrad, I was in an MA PhD program in American Studies. I'm getting married. I'm ABD, so I decided at a certain point I was miserably writing my dissertation on the Westernization of yoga and how we appropriate and commodify that. I was like, I'm really miserable. This is not my voice. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like enough, right, or my own. I was adopting somebody else's voice. And I was really depressed. I just didn't feel good. Like every single day, I didn't want to get up and do this thing again. And that was an indicator for me after being so stubborn about it for so long. Like, I am meant to be Dr. Helen Wang. Like, that is who I am going to be. My parents understand that. They're not going to understand anything else. I went through all of that. And then when you just can't like gulp down your own words, and you just like, it just is not right. You just have this moment, right? And so I contacted an old mentor, so keep your mentors here. Somebody who I knew really knew me well, really knew, and I think I contacted him because I felt like that was the last time I felt good about what it is I was doing. And he said, you should think about the job at Carnegie Mellon. Like, what is student affairs? That's a professional, like people do that in real life, that's a real job. And that's all she wrote. So I say that because I had to have this really humbling moment where the thing that I thought success was and what I was meant to do and what people would understand, I had to let go of that, super uncomfortable, to make room for this thing that it's so much more me. My parents still have no clue what I do, right? They're like, what is this student affairs stuff? And sometimes I don't know what I'm doing either, right? But it feels meaningful, it feels good. And when we continue to do things that feel good in our life, like that's what it's all about. It doesn't matter what label title I have. Just every day I'm so rewarded by the opportunity to sit here in this space authentically, right? So finding a match between your voice and your person and that work, broadly defined, like how you want your everyday life to feel like, and the kind of people you want to surround yourself with, I think is really critical.
I would say I have evolved in my thinking on this point. So in the moments when I have been looking for a job all throughout my life, I think it's a little bit like I was looking for, Cinderella's shoe, right? Like, I want the perfect fit. And I don't know that was ever a helpful frame for me. And I think a more helpful frame is, because I think I went into it with the assumption that whatever my next step was going to be forever, because my parents literally never left their job or their house. They're still in the same house they've been in for 40 years, and they never left their job. They were teachers. And so my model was like, wherever you go, you're going to be there forever. And my sister and I, and it's not true for our generation, it's not true for your generation, that it's very unlikely you're going to go to one place and stay there forever. And so I had to do a lot of rethinking about what I need in an environment, and just let go of this idea that I have to find the perfect environment. And instead, I think what I look at and what I encourage my friends and my family who are thinking about, job searching, okay, what do you need out of this next experience? And what are the boundaries, right? What are your deal breakers? Like, if this is going to be really bad for you and the yield is going to be low, this probably isn't the right next step. But if you can get something out of it that you need, it's not forever, and when it gets to this point, that's it. That may be an okay scenario for you to enter into. I think the benefit of doing this multiple times, I have had a range of experiences. I know what kind of supervisory style I work really well with, and I know what I don't work well with. That doesn't mean that if I'm ever looking again, that I'm only going to go for something that looks like something great. There may be a trade-off that makes it worth it, recognizing that it may not be forever, but it may be like the next step in my journey. And recognizing that the next step is not even great. So you may be doing grunt work when you're, that's appropriate, and it's probably not going to be your forever. So what is the thing that you need out of it? Do you need experience? Do you need to rule something out? Do you need to know what this industry is like? Do you need to make connections? Okay, how long do you need to do that? And where, sort of thinking vaguely one step ahead of them, right? What goes after that? But again, being mindful that there will be deal breakers. I have had to endure abusive supervisory experiences. And there may be a point at which you experience those things too. I hope not. But at different points in our lives, we all have to navigate difficult situations. And I think the fact that you have tremendous resources here, even after you graduate, is amazing. I wish I had had those.
Yeah.
But also those mentors to turn to be like, here's the situation I'm in. Is this normal? How do I navigate it? And if it's not navigable, how do I get out of this and move on?
Someone told me when I was thinking about moving from Carnegie Mellon, someone told me you need a sponsor. I'm like, what's a sponsor? A sponsor is different than a mentor. A sponsor is someone who watches out for you, like who is really invested in your personal and professional growth, like you. And you kind of have to figure out who that person is and actually invite them to do that. It's like literally have that potentially awkward conversation to say, I'm in this place in my life where I could really use someone to help me ask the right questions, to pay attention to opportunities that maybe I haven't even thought of would be good for me. To help refine the way I'm supposed to participate in the world, right? And based on my gifts. And I found one, and that was really helpful to me. And it wasn't somebody who was at work, it was somebody I knew, like, just really loved me, So maybe that's something worth thinking about.
In your experience, have you ever worked in a place where no one is like you? Like I know, I worked in investment management, like very bro-y industry, literally, like the teams would be divided up. The female associates would be on teams with female mentors, and the male associates would be on teams with male mentors. We literally had a testosterone corner in our office, like that's what people called it. So how do you navigate a space like that and make connections with people who like there's literally a setup who you're not really supposed to connect with?
May I? So you may be surprised to hear that the legal field can be analogous to that, and in some ways it's not. So I will. When you're a law student and you're on the job search, it's a pretty dehumanizing experience. And I remember I came from a nonprofit field. Before I worked as a lawyer, I had never worked outside of a nonprofit environment. My first job as a lawyer was my first for-profit endeavor. And my background was almost entirely in sex ed. And I swear, I am convinced that there was one law firm that brought me in just to entertain people as an interviewee, because everyone I met with just looked at me like, tell me about this. Right, it was so dehumanizing, and I walked out of that interview and I burst out crying. It was so clear to me that was such a bad fit. And I went to other law firms and I interviewed at other places where people were actually, they had developed outside interests and philanthropic endeavors that they cultivated in their work and outside of their work. So to the extent I had a choice, I was not going to the environment where sort of doing something in a nonprofit field was laughable. There are environments that are not like Wellesley, that are hostile and unfriendly and uncaring and misogynistic. And you may have to navigate those spaces, and I think it's even more important in those spaces to find your champion and to recognize that your champion may be male identified. So when I was practicing law, my champion was a partner I worked for he was brilliant, and when I started a family and I came back from leave, he said, I am invested in your success. he's like, when I adopted my child, this is what I did. I want you to have that same opportunity. I'm not going to give up on you. I'm not assuming that you're on the mommy track. And he was my champion. And in fact, he was the best role model I had for work-life balance. And so I was sticking by him. And I think it's important to find there will be people there. You just may have to work a little hard to find them. And if you can't find them, that's also a sign that may not be a sustainable environment. But I think you can find people. And sometimes you will maybe not find someone, but you will become that one for yourself and someone else. How sustainable it is, and you get to decide for how long you want to do that. Is anyone in career ed cringing at my advice? Okay, because if it is, you should just sort of like go give me a sign that's like.
I have one small thing to add, and it's just small. It's so in my last institution, I was the only woman of color in senior leadership, and most of the times when I show up in spaces, people are like, "Are you a student?" Right? So I started to really feel that. I wasn't aware of that until I was asked. People were surprised. I like to tell people I'm 42 years old. I shouldn't have to tell people I'm 42 years old, but I was not. There were moments in my career where I knew I wasn't being taken seriously because I'm an Asian woman, and that at the time looked young, and I really hate that I had to declare that, but it was getting in the way. It was getting in the way of me moving to where I know I could go. I feel conflicted that I had to sort of assert that, but when you arrive and people immediately question you, which is something that's so, I don't feel that here. I felt that where I was, a place I love. It was really difficult. It was a very othering experience, but one that taught me that, I know myself, I know I'm capable of, and at a certain point I was just tired of the doubt, and I just tried to lay it rest here.
There was a question in the back.
You basically answered it. My question was going to be kind of about like, what are your tips for intentional quitting? Whether it's well-timed or when it's like poorly timed, but you've got to leave someplace that maybe you've invested a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are your tips for intentional quitting? Like, you got to get out, besides having maybe a sponsor or, having an inside or outside champion.
So I remember Career Ed put on that program and asked me to participate, and I was like, no, I need to attend that program, not participate in it. Real honest time, I'm not really good at it, and I'm working on it. I think it's really complicated. Do you have the financial ability to walk away from situations that are bad for you? You look at, the academia, right? And you can't just walk away from like the person in the field who is the person in the field, right? It's complicated. And I would say every situation is so nuanced and different that you can't figure it out alone. And that said, I think, there's a time for bravery and there's a time for self-preservation. And I could not give you a prescription about what measure those two things go together in and when. But if you have good people investing in you around you to talk it through, like we have this conversation all the time in student life. People want like rules about what happens when something goes wrong. And we can almost never articulate like beyond a very skeletal framework because every situation is so different and really oftentimes you're just thinking by analogy and building and iterating on knowledge from past experience. So that's a really fancy way of saying, I don't know.
I don't know if I intentionally quit my last place, but maybe it was I wanted to grow in different ways. I love where I was. I really loved it. And I still love it to this day. But I think at a certain point, you kind of realize that your stretch is a little bit less, what's the word, stretchy? than you need it to be, right? And so I'm a firm believer that we have to take the things that we want in our lives into our own hands, and if we can, if we are able to, if we have the luxury of doing so, just commit to it, you know? And knowing that we're going to grow and stretch as a result of that discomfort. You know, it's easier said than done, though.
Yeah, those have been the hardest moments of my life, hands down. But there is another side to them. You do get through them. That's the thing I hope you take away, is that even if you have to quit something, and even if that quitting goes really badly, which I have done, ugly, bad. It's not the end. It's just a new door, and there you can regroup and you can recover. It doesn't have to be. It's not a finale. Just a season-ending cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels like a really good segue to pizza.
Yes, if there are no other questions, there is pizza. But thank you to Helen and Claudia for